Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 211, and we're going to talk about the ILA strike and how it is basically legal extortion. So, back in episode 30, I did discuss a strike when it happened among graduate students at a university. Today, we'll apply the same critique to the Longshoreman Strike that's taking place right now. So, a couple of the bits of information that we uh, ought to know if you didn't know anything about it, but I don't see how you could not have heard about it, unless, of course, you're in the more of the hurricane hit areas. But a lot of this information is from a Reuters article that I had found. Most of it anyway. So there was a strike back in 1977, the International Longshoremen's Association. And I actually remember that strike. Interestingly enough, I remember it being kind of very controversial. I was 12 years old at the time, and I was thinking, wow, this is pretty serious stuff. But there hasn't been a strike since, and they are striking against their employer, the United States Maritime Alliance. And it's this one employer which employs all 45,000 longshoremen workers who work at 36 ports all along the East Coast, all the way down to Texas, all the way up to Maine. So major ports all up and down the coast, they are affected, they are closed, and I think I read somewhere else that that's like 60% of all the shipping of the entire United States. Um, their employer, the United States Maritime Alliance, USMA, offered them a 50% raise, but the union wants more, a 50% raise, but it's not enough. And the reason why they say it's not enough is because over the last few years, there was an 800% increase in profit. And so they believe that as workers for this company, they are entitled for some of that money. And their justification to leverage this demand is because they had a lot of risk during the Cervasis, which I think is kind of funny, given that there was no real risk. A lot of the information that the government had put out was not true, and that's being proven. More and more information is coming out every day. So really, it was pretty cool to be able to get out when a lot of people weren't allowed out. And that should have made them really suspicious too, Like, wow, okay, essential workers, they're not dying. But hey, everyone else would die if they came out, right? That's so bizarre. I don't know how people can rationally, accept the contradictory scenario and continue to believe it. I don't know. Moving on. So employers must offer the pay that reflects the worker's sacrifice and contribution. Sacrifice and contribution. It was the job they agreed to take. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. My critique of what's going on, I will do it after I run down the basics of the strike. So Trump says that because of inflation, that that's the source of their complaint is the inflation, and that's because of Harris and Waltz. And there are, sorry about that. Um, so Trump says it's because of inflation, and there are implications for global trade. In other words, those ships that are coming to the United States are kind of like buses or planes with connecting flights. So they drop off a bunch of goods and then they have to move on to their next job. And if there's a delay here, then there is a global implication, right? It's a supply chain issue. And so if they're all stuck here, then the places where they have to go to pick up more stuff, to drop off more stuff, there are delays there, right? And so there's a ripple effect. It's a serious issue, okay? So part of the demands of the union is that they want protection for their jobs, particularly against automation. So they want job security so that they cannot be replaced by machines. They also want container royalty monies. Now, I'm not really too sure what that is. I Googled it a little bit. And apparently, there's a certain kind of payment that is given, I guess, according to the container, uh, for compensation in case someone loses a job, and they want 100% of all of that money. They don't want to share it with their employer who's already making too much money. And they want guaranteed employment and benefits. And so it seems like a lot of these longshoremen, they're hired, and there's no guarantee that they'll be given a job the following year. I'm kind of familiar with this. This is similar to what was going on in the faculty. So I'll begin my critique by talking about this guaranteed employment thing. Guaranteed employment, even if after a probationary period, is kind of a moral hazard because once you get the guaranteed employment, you become lazy. That's why lots of government workers are lazy. That's why people who are in guaranteed jobs, like teaching jobs that are protected by unions, they're guaranteed. And so that's why a lot of teachers get lazy as well. So in my case, because there was no guaranteed employment, they tried to make it something like guaranteed employment, and they have it in the contract. The reason why is because if you are slacking off, if suddenly the quality of your teaching is not up to snuff, then the employer should have the right to terminate your contract. And I believe that, right? My own situation is that they made up failures on my part in order to justify a termination. And so that's my problem, right? A breach of contract. So, what is this strike that we're looking at by the International Longshoremen's Association? It's legalized extortion, right? It's extortion. What is extortion, first of all? Definition of extortion is the practice of obtaining something, especially money, through force or threats. That's extortion. So strikes are extortion, examples of extortion, and it's legal. Section 7 of the National Labor Relations Act, unions can even time the actions for maximum effect to force negotiations. And so basically that's what it is. I gave the car repair analogy, I believe yesterday briefly, and I gave it back in episode 30, but I'll share it with you again in case you didn't listen to yesterday's episode. So let's just say you have a car that needs to be repaired. And so you call up the mechanic and you say, hey, can you fix my car? And the guy looks at the car and he says, yeah, it's a $500 job. I'll fix it for 500 bucks. And so you, as the owner, you say, sure, okay, I'll pick it up tomorrow. So you come by to pick up the car and you got your 500 bucks ready. And the mechanic says, I changed my mind. It's $5,000. And you're like, hey, that's 10 times more than what we agreed to yesterday. And the mechanic says, yeah, but if you want your car back, you're going to have to give me $5,000. And so most people eventually probably will hand over the 5,000 because the car is worth more than that, right? So you're thinking about the car, and so you want the car back, and so you're going to shell out the 5,000, even though it puts you in a difficult situation. So who is the car owner? The car owner would probably be, in this situation, the United States Maritime Alliance, the employer. And the mechanic would be the longshoreman, the ILA, the Longshoremen's Association. But then who's the car, right? What does the car represent? And the car represents all of the people who are now used as leverage by the union in order to get the owner of the car, or in this case, United States Maritime Alliance, to shell out the money. And chances are they're going to get what they want. That's the way these strikes are going these days, particularly with an administration, with a president who claims to be pro-labor. They're probably going to at least meet some of the demands. So, what are they demanding? No automation. So why would they want automation, right? So why would a company desire automation, and why would the longshoremen try not to have automation? Well, if you watched any of the Hollywood movies, and yes, they're problematic, but you know that by having people, look and examine and inspect the containers, you have a lot of fraud. You have smuggling. And so I'm almost positive that one reason why the union is so strong against automation is it cuts into the smuggling operations that are probably existing in every single port. And so the maritime uh, alliance, they probably want to cut down on smuggling and fraud and whatnot. I don't know how I feel about that, but clearly that is part of it. And so probably more a less talked about, publicized aspect of the automation argument. But I think it's there. I think it's obviously there. And so clearly, if you are benefiting from kickbacks and, bribes and whatever, then you need to have people do the inspection, not, computers and machines that you cannot bribe. All right. Also, think about it. No automation. Think about it. With automation, you have more productivity, which means higher pay. And so a lot of these guys that work for the union, they don't understand the basic economics. And so they see automation as a destruction of jobs. And so if we go back to Ford, and Henry Ford, is he brought in the assembly line. So come to think of it, that's not the example I should be using. But he introduced more productivity, right? Increased productivity, and it allowed him to have the highest paid workers at the time. Probably a better example for productivity would be the if you ever watch Free to Choose, the Milton Friedman 1980 documentary series, I believe it's in volume two. It's either volume one or volume two, The Power of the Market. So I guess it's uh, uh, the first episode where they show, oh no, I'm sorry. It's the second episode, volume two, where they show hand loom workers in India. And so, this is back in 1980. They show hand loom workers who working their hand looms, hand operated looms, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They need to have those hand looms in operation all the time, so much so that they have the hand looms in people's houses, right? So their house is their factory and they're cranking out material. And as soon as one person gets too tired and they come off, another family member jumps on the hand loom and starts cranking away to make product. And of course, quality is uneven, and they still can't keep up with demand. But hey, they're protecting people's jobs. Those jobs are not great jobs. Now, if you automate it, sort of like the way Japan did, then you'd have machines doing the loom work, and it frees up all the people to do other things, right? Because the cost of the material is a lot lower, and now you're producing so much stuff, you can have a rise in other industry like fashion. Now you're cranking out all this material. You need trucks to move all of the material, not just one small cart. Now you need trucks, several trucks. And where are the trucks going to travel on? On roads. And so now you need construction workers, you see. And so uh, where's this cloth going to go? They're going to go to factories, which are going to turn the cloth into, clothing. And then what happens after that? Then you need retail stores to sell all of the stuff that you've just produced. And so the number of jobs that have been created through increased productivity is just off the charts. So how would it work in dock work? Well, if you are increasing productivity, then you can handle more cargo, especially if the United States did not kill domestic cargo, then you would be exporting as much as you are importing, right? I think I might have mentioned it. Why are there so many container houses these days, right? So containers that are piling up at the ports, normally they would be loaded back onto ships full of American products. But since we don't make anything in the United States anymore that is exported, they're just sitting empty on all of these uh, port properties. And so someone says, hey, we can turn these into houses. And so now you have this sort of trendy container house phenomena, right? Turning these containers into houses. But that's only possible because nothing is being shipped out. And so what if you could increase the amount of work that is happening at these ports? Because now you have domestic manufacturing back on track. It also probably means that you could have different types of operations at the port, which would ensure that a lot of people not only would make more money, but at the same time you would have better jobs available for people. And so people always talk about union solidarity, right? Well, what kind of solidarity are we talking about? Most unions function on a last in, first out basis. If you were the last one to be hired and join the union, when they start making cuts, you're the first one they're going to fire. So it's a seniority based kind of system. So everyone is not the same. Um, Also, younger workers can't afford a strike like older workers who've been working for a long time and have been able to save some money. Younger workers need this money. That's why they took the job, right? Um, and so even if they were able to get all that they wanted, that solidarity will start falling apart when people start losing their jobs. And I am sure there are creative ways to work around all of the promises of a contract. I'll give you an example. In the university, when you have tenure, right, you can't be fired, right? Unless, and we found this out recently, unless your department no longer exists. So we see this all over the College of Liberal Arts, but there's the number of students that want to major in the liberal arts are going through the floor. There are fewer and fewer students, and so you can't justify all of these professors and all of these liberal arts departments, and so you have to downsize, and they're rolling up several departments into one. And so when you get rid of or dissolve a department, all of the tenure goes away, right? That's a clause in one of these contracts. And so you're tenured to a department that no longer exists, and so therefore there's no tenure any longer. Right. So I'm sure that longshoremen unions, there are ways of getting around this employment guarantees. Also, keep in mind, if we take another step out, that if the companies themselves were not protected or assisted by regulation, there would be greater competition. As I said, there's only one employer, the United States Maritime Alliance. Why is there only one? And it's likely because it was the largest. It was able to afford all of the regulatory expenses that smaller ports, right, with smaller companies could not afford. And so they were bought up by the larger ones. And so now there's only one, right? It's typically how you have what happens when there's regulatory capture, when certain insiders pass the very regulation which forces smaller competitors to close or to be sold out, right? And that's what's happening in the banking industry. It's what happens in pharmaceutical, automotive, time and time again, right? So if the companies were not protected by regulation, there would be more competition. And so if you don't like the way you're being treated at this company, then you can find a job at another company, right? Or just find a better job. A lot of the longshoremen say, well, they took a lot of risks during the cervasis, the corona, right? But the risk is not equal between employer and employee, right? So, and yes, I know that there's a lot of injustice there. I'll get to that. But when a business goes bust, the employee does not have to help pay for the bankruptcy, right? They just take their money and they lose their job. But the investors of the company, the people who own the company, they take a hit. They lose a lot of their money. And if there was more competition, there were other port authorities, right? And they were taking profits unjustly, then they would be punished eventually in the free market. Part of the punishment arises when one company does not invest in automation fast enough. And so other ports become cheaper, other ports become more efficient and faster. And so other ships are going to go to that port rather than the slower, less modern port, right? And so the free market punishes people who don't upgrade their equipment, right? Like automation. Protected companies, as I just mentioned, do not have the incentive to improve. They don't need to because there is no competition. Also, think about safety, right? They say, "Oh, we risk our lives." Well, safety comes with more automation, right? So, think about 100 years ago, you were unloading everything by hand. Now you have machines do this, and so with automation comes greater safety. So, are you concerned about the safety or aren't you, right? And then Trump's comments, yeah, the problem with his comments is that, yeah, it's an inflation issue, but his administration created a tremendous amount of inflation. So for him to just put it all at the bottom of the feet of Biden and Harris is a little bit not true, right? And it's times like this that I wish Trump would come clean and take the opportunity to educate people and say, this is why we can't do this again, right? But of course, that's not what he's going to do. It's so frustrating whenever that happens. So coercion happens when choice is taken away, right? Everyone gets hurt, especially the consumer. Remember, the consumers are the leverage. We are also going to be the victims in this theater. These are labor monopolies, right? And so there is no choice. You can't hire anyone else. But here's the thing, if you didn't like the pay, then you shouldn't have taken the job, right? So think about it. You're applying for a job, you don't like the pay, but you take the job anyway. I don't know. That is kind of absurd. And if you agreed to be paid a certain amount, then that's what you agreed to. You can't change things on the fly, right? And then they say that they can't be replaced. Of course, they can't be replaced. It's a monopoly, right? It's almost like the old school guilds in the Middle Ages where trade knowledge was secret knowledge, right? So if you wanted to know how to be a blacksmith, you had to apprentice with the blacksmith, and then you had to be part of the guild, and you couldn't share that information with anyone else, right? So it's a monopoly of information. Well, this is no different, right? It's a monopoly of skills, of training, and all this other kind of stuff. And so what they're actually engaging in is price fixing, right? So wages are prices. They are trying to meddle with the prices. And so they're trying to fix the price arbitrarily higher than it should be. Now, how high it should go, clearly they were willing to go, the Maritime Alliance was willing to go up 50%, but they want 100%. And so, you're kind of at an impasse. And then the union leader said, "Oh, don't call us greedy, call them greedy." Well, again, here it is. Everyone's greedy. Everyone is greedy, okay? But the worst is government, right? Because of their greed, we have inflation because they want to spend and fund all the wars all over the world, sending billions of dollars overseas while only giving 750 bucks to hurricane victims and, 700 bucks to fire victims. It's idiotic. I mean, it's so outrageous. And I think that if the longshoremen also kind of got a clue and put the blame at the government's feet, that it's the inflation, right? Then I think a lot of people would start waking up as to the true cause of what's going on. So all these people, they hate each other when it's actually the government that's at the root of the problem, starting from the corporate monopolies to the labor monopolies to then the legalized extortion. I mean, all of this stuff, right? And just like longshoremen, when I was teaching, I saw the signs. I knew that I was at risk of losing my job at any minute for any kind of whim of some political correctness. I made preparations, right? And so that's what every responsible person should do if you know how the game is played. Well, anyway, so hopefully one day everyone will realize that freedom is the answer, more freedom, more choices, so that if you don't like a situation, you don't agree to it. You find a deal that's better. And we find this freedom through less government interference by decreasing the size of government, like Calvin Coolidge did, and actually, remember, he broke up the Boston police strike. And I think something like that should be enacted here as well, and for people to take out their anger and their ire against the true authors of inflation, and that would be most of the politicians in Washington. That's it for today. I'll talk to you next time.